Hello everyone, this is Miss Wills here, and today we're going to be focusing on Act 4, Scene 2 of Macbeth. And as always, can you please follow along with the recording and the lesson, and can you carry out the tasks on the slides, please? Okay, so we're going to start by recapping last lesson and Act 4, Scene 1. So what I'd like you to do for me first of all is to complete the tasks on this slide. So fill in the blanks with the quotation below and also list the 4 apparitions of the witch to show Macbeth. I would like you to also challenge yourself and see if you know what the witches actually say to Macbeth when they show him each apparition. So can you please pause this clip and this recording, and give that a go. Okay, hopefully you managed to give that a go. And what I'm going to do now is put the next slide on, which has the answers. So if you can check your own against the answers that are on the screen now, please do so. So the quote is, "Be bloody, bold and resolute, laugh to scorn the power of man, for none of woman born shall harm Macbeth." Now, the 4 apparitions that the witches show Macbeth. The first one is an armed head. Now, when they show him the armed head, this is when they tell him to beware of Macduff. The second one is a bloody child, and this is where they say, "None of woman born shall harm Macbeth." And the third one is a child crowned with a tree in his hand. This is where they tell Macbeth that he will not meet his end until Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane. And finally, a show of 8 kings, last with a glass in his hand. Well, here we see Macbeth getting quite anxious because he says all of these kings look like Banquo. Okay, so again, this is awakening his anxiety about Banquo's children being on the throne. So in this scene, it's quite an ambivalent scene where the witches are really confusing Macbeth because in one breath they are telling him and giving him security in the sense that none of woman born shall harm him. So he thinks, well, everyone's born of woman, so of course I'm going to be okay then. He's quite confident and feels quite assured. But then in the next breath they tell him he also needs to be aware of Macduff, and he also needs to be aware of this kind of idea of maybe Banquo's children being on the throne. So they're very much manipulating and playing with his mind and mental state here, which is really interesting, and which obviously leads us on to what he does next. Now then, I would like you to look at this quote. So where the witches say, "Macbeth, Macbeth, beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife." And I'd like you to pause this recording and write down your answers to these questions. So 1, how do you think Macbeth feels after hearing this? And 2, what does he do next? What do you know he does next? If you can please just pause this recording and carry out that activity, that'd be great. Okay, hopefully you've got something on the lines of he's feeling very anxious. He's already worried about Macduff because in Act 3, he doesn't come to his coronation, and to Macbeth this kind of shows that he is a potential threat, that he's possibly going to try and overthrow him, and he's already been worried about Macduff. This kind of just solidifies that for him, so that anxiety surrounding him is increasing here. What does he do next then? Well, of course, he plans to kill Macduff's family, and that brings us on to Act 4, Scene 2. Now, Act 4, Scene 2 is set in Macduff's castle in Fife, and it obviously focuses on the death of his family and the fact that he's left his family, he's fled Scotland. Now, what I'd like you to do before we start analysing this scene is I'd like you to watch it. So the link is on the slide here, and I'd like you to summarise the scene in no more than 20 words. So can you please pause this recording and give that a go? Okay, so just a summary of what's kind of happened in this scene. So, of course, you've got Lady Macduff asked Ross why her husband has fled Scotland and feels betrayed. She's very, very angry at the fact her husband has left them and left them quite vulnerable as well. She tells her son that his father is dead and he doesn't believe her. A messenger warns Lady Macduff even that she is in danger, and the murderers enter and kill her and her young son. So here we have a complete destruction of innocence. So this is the next step that Macbeth has taken to secure his position on the throne. So some people argue that this is the most shocking scene in the play and that it marks the point where the audience lose all sympathy for Macbeth. Now, what I would like you to do is to pause this recording and write down whether or not you agree with this statement and why. Is this the most shocking scene? Is it more shocking than the killing of the king? Why do you think that's the case? And also, Macbeth is presented to us as this tragic hero, something we've talked about in previous lessons. Although he is a man who carries out these awful acts, because of his downfall, his hubris, he's also a man that we could possibly have sympathized with before because he's manipulated perhaps by the witches, manipulated by Lady Macbeth into carrying out the initial act, which kind of led him down this path of murder. So I want you to think about, do we lose all sympathy for him here now, or do we not? Maybe do we think he's still being completely manipulated by the witches, therefore we still feel a little bit sympathetic towards him? I want you to write your ideas down for that, please. So please pause this clip and give that a go. Okay, another thing I would like us to think about this scene is that Macbeth is absent yet again when this murder is being carried out. He's carried out murder in this play in Killing King Duncan. Yes, we haven't seen it on stage, but we know he's done it. He's accustomed to violence and killing because he was seen as a really good soldier, brave Macbeth. And he has early in the play been described as this, and his violence is described when we're told about how he fought in the war and he unseamed someone from the knave to the chaps. Okay, so it's quite a violent image. We know he's accustomed to that violent life. Yet he does not carry out the murder of Banquo, and he does not carry out the murder of the Macduff's family. I would like you to think about and write down why you think this is the case. Why has he not carried out the murders here? And I would also like you to think about what this tells us about his character at this point. So please pause this recording again and get your ideas down. Okay, so perhaps you got some ideas along the lines of maybe with it being Banquo, if he does have the sense of guilt of killing his friend, of killing innocent people, so he can't actually do it himself. And maybe because he's got so much power now, he doesn't need to carry them out. He can just use his men to carry out this kind of sticky action that he doesn't really want to get involved in again. It might be because he knows the impact of killing someone on his own mind and mental state. So he doesn't want to go through that again. He wants to distance himself from the actual action of killing people. Does this tell us maybe he isn't a cold-blooded killer? Perhaps. I mean, what does this tell us about his character? It could possibly be that he's a coward, maybe. Although he wants the murderous acts to be carried out, he knows he cannot do it himself because he has a conscience, maybe because he feels guilty. So these are the kind of things that you might have put down. So moving on, we're going to look specifically at Lady Macduff's character in Act 4, Scene 2. And what I'd like you to do for me is I'd like you to find at least a quote for each of these points below. So where do we see in the scene that Lady Macduff is angry? Where do we see she's hopeless, scared and rejected? Now I'm going to give you an example for angry. When she discusses how her husband has neglected them, she says wisdom to leave his wife, to leave his babes. She seems very bitter towards Macduff for neglecting them and leaving them in this vulnerable position. Now I'd like you to do the same for the other three, please. If you just pause this clip again and give that a go. Okay, so we're going to look at a device used by Shakespeare here, and that is contrast. And I'd like you to get this definition down for me, please, if you can. So contrast is a device through which writers identify differences between two subjects, places, persons, things, or ideas. And this is to convey meanings, themes, and key ideas, essentially. So What I want you to think about once you've wrote that definition down is which character serves as Lady Macduff's contrast, do you think? So I'd like you to pause this recording again and come up with any ideas. Who serves as her contrast? Okay, so I definitely think one character or the main character you would compare Lady Macduff to is, of course, Lady Macbeth. Aside from the witches, these are kind of the only women that appear in the play, even though Lady Macduff doesn't really have much. She isn't in it for very long. But Lady Macbeth, we have here some key points we know about her. She seems to disdain anyone who has the milk of human kindness. She's murderous thoughts. She surrenders her body to dark spirits. She tries to rid of her femininity because she associates it with weakness. And in regard to her baby, she says she would dash the brains out had she so sworn. So this idea that she's kind of lost a maternal instinct if she ever had one, because there is kind of, it's hinted at in the play that she did have a child at one point, perhaps she can't have them anymore. But what I'd like you to do now is for the other side of this table, I would like you to write down any points about how Lady Macduff compares to Lady Macbeth. I think Shakespeare is very much inviting you to compare the two women here. And I'd like you to think about how they contrast each other. So I'd like you to make some points and just like here, support them with some quotations, please. So just please pause this clip again and carry out that task. Okay, so I've just got some ideas down this side here that you can check against your own and add to if you want. So as I said, she's very protective of children. She's very maternal. When she talks about the poor wren, the most diminutive of birds, will fight her young ones in her nest against the owl. I mean, she is here kind of, discussing the fact that this is what Macduff should be doing, but it's kind of what she's left to do with the children, protect them. She has no intentions of doing harm, unlike Lady Macbeth, of course. She says, I have done no harm. She says that she recognizes that. She's associated with good, purity, and heaven. You know, when the messenger comes to warn her, he says, Heaven preserve you. She's kind of painted in this kind of heavenly way, and discuss her own femininity. She says, why then, alas, do I put up that womanly defence? So we know that she's very much a feminine character, so she kind of embodies all that femininity would have been expected to be. Back then, she was very maternal. She protected, she's protecting her children here as well, and she seems very pure and she seems very good in contrast to Lady Macbeth. So, what we're going to think about now is another contrast. So we've looked at contrast of character. I would now like you to consider contrast of setting. I like to think about Macbeth, the setting of Macbeth's home of his castle in comparison to the setting of Macduff's castle as well, and how these are perhaps presented differently, how this domestic space is presented differently. So what I'd like you to do for me, please, is I'd like you to pause this recording again. In fact, I think what we're going to have to do here, guys, because the recording, I am running out of time, is I'm going to stop this recording here, and I'd like you to click onto the next link, which is just going to be the second half of the lesson for me. So if you please just carry out this activity, and then once you've done that, I would like you to click on the second link for the second recording for this lesson. Thank you very much.